The city was a restless place that winter, gripped by a biting chill that crept into every crevice, piercing even the thickest coats and scarves. The streets bustled with life as people hurried from one warm destination to another, their heads bowed against the wind. In a narrow alley behind a busy cafe, John Mitchell sat hunched on a flattened cardboard box. His belongings, a tattered duffel bag, a wool blanket, and a few keepsakes, were bundled tightly beside him, his only anchors in a world that had long drifted away from him. At 68 years old, John was a shadow of the man he once was. Deep lines etched his face, and his hardened jawline told of battles fought, both on distant battlefields and within the confines of his own mind. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now carried a distant haze, as though they had seen too much to focus on the present. His hands, rough and calloused from years of labor, trembled slightly as he held a small cup of coffee, its warmth a fleeting comfort on such a frigid day. The coffee was a gift from a passing stranger, an act of kindness so rare in John's world that it felt almost unreal. He stared at the steam rising from the cup, allowing himself a moment to savor the small mercy. But even as he did, he knew the warmth would not last. It never did. To the throngs of people rushing past, John was invisible, a ghost blending into the backdrop of the city's relentless pace. Yet John hadn't always been invisible. Decades ago, he was Sergeant John Mitchell of the 82nd Airborne Division, a leader, a protector, a man people admired and trusted. He had been a soldier who served his country with honor, risking his life in combat zones most people only read about in headlines. But the battles he fought overseas were nothing compared to the war he faced when he returned home. When John's military service ended, he had returned to a world that no longer felt familiar. The friends he had once laughed with had moved on, building lives that left little room for the man he had become. His family, strained by years of separation and his emotional distance, had grown distant themselves. The job he had been promised, a position that was supposed to give him stability and purpose, fell through due to budget cuts. And just like that, the foundation of his new life crumbled beneath him. What followed was a slow, agonizing descent. At first, John tried to hold on, working odd jobs and living frugally. But the trauma he carried, the memories of fallen comrades, the sounds of gunfire that echoed in his dreams, made it hard to function. Night after night, he wrestled with the weight of his experiences, feeling more and more isolated as the world around him continued without pause. His savings dwindled, his health declined, and eventually he found himself on the streets, a casualty of a war no one could see. For years, John moved from shelter to shelter, struggling to survive. He learned to navigate the unspoken rules of life on the margins, avoiding trouble when he could and enduring it when he couldn't. He grew used to the cold stares of passers-by, the averted gazes that told him he was unwanted, unseen. But no matter how hard it got, John held on to a sliver of hope, a faint, flickering belief that maybe, just maybe, things could change. One bitterly cold evening, John found himself behind the cafe, seeking a brief respite from the icy wind. He tucked himself into a corner, hoping to remain unnoticed. But the cafe's manager, spotting him through the window, frowned and reached for the phone. Minutes later, a police officer arrived, his presence a stark reminder of society's intolerance for those who had nowhere else to go. "You can't stay here," the officer said, his tone firm but not unkind. John nodded silently, years of military discipline guiding him to comply without argument. He gathered his belongings, careful not to leave a trace behind, and began to walk away. But before he could get far, the officer stopped him. "Wait," he said, his voice sterner now. "We've had complaints. You're trespassing." John's heart sank. He had hoped, just this once, to be left in peace. But peace, it seemed, was a luxury he could no longer afford. The officer took him into custody, booking him for trespassing. As John sat in the cold, sterile station, the weight of his situation pressed down on him. He thought about the thousands of nights he had spent like this, alone, forgotten, unwanted. When the officer handed him a court date, John accepted it without a word. He wasn't sure it mattered anymore. When John's court date arrived, he entered the courtroom with his head held low. He wore a mismatched jacket donated by a shelter and shoes that pinched his feet, their soles worn thin. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them in front of him, waiting for his name to be called. Around him, the other attendees whispered and smirked, their glances heavy with judgment. To them, he was just another homeless man, another statistic in a system that had long since failed. The judge entered, and the room rose in unison. She was a stern woman with sharp eyes and a commanding presence, her voice brisk as she addressed each case before her. Finally, she reached John's file. "John Mitchell," she called, her tone formal. John raised his hand slightly, his voice too dry to respond. As the judge read through his file, something caught her attention. Her expression shifted, and she paused, rereading a line. Looking up, she scanned the room, her gaze settling on John. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice softer now, "were you in the 82nd Airborne Division?" The room fell silent. John's eyes widened, a flood of memories rushing back. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice barely audible. "That was me." The judge leaned back in her chair, her sharp demeanor softening. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, her tone thick with emotion, "my brother served in that same division. He often spoke of a man who saved his life, someone he described as courageous, selfless, a true hero. That man's name was John Mitchell." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The whispers stopped, replaced by a stunned silence. John, once invisible, was now a hero in their eyes. He nodded slowly, his throat tight with emotion. "I did my duty, ma'am," he said, his voice trembling. "Just what I thought was right." The judge cleared her throat, visibly moved. Turning to the courtroom, she spoke with a clarity and conviction that left no room for doubt. "This man served our country with a bravery few of us can comprehend. Yet today, he stands before us charged with trespassing, simply for seeking shelter from the cold. This is a man who deserves our respect, not our condemnation." She turned back to John, her tone gentle. "Mr. Mitchell, I am dismissing these charges. Furthermore, I am ordering immediate assistance for you. You deserve more than this. You deserve stability, support, and a place to call home." Tears welled up in John's eyes. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a burden, but as someone who mattered. As the courtroom erupted into applause, strangers approached him, shaking his hand, thanking him for his service, and offering words of encouragement. The warmth of their gestures melted the years of cold indifference he had endured. As John left the courthouse that day, tears streamed down his face, not from sadness, but from gratitude. He had spent years being invisible, a forgotten man in a world that seemed to have no place for him. But now, he felt hope, a small but growing belief that his story wasn't over. This powerful story reminds us that everyone carries unseen struggles, that every life has value. It challenges us to look beyond appearances, to see the humanity in those we often overlook. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Together, let's shine a light on the stories that matter, reminding us of the compassion that connects us all.